You are listening to the Music Ed Mentor Podcast, where we help music educators to build, manage, and grow thriving school music programs and have long and happy careers. Today, we are talking about something that can make or break your music classes. It's at-home practice. This is something that continues to come up in discussions between music teachers all over the United States and all over the world. How do you get kids to stay engaged enough that they want to practice at home? How do you track at-home practice? Should it contribute to a grade? And if so, how do you track that? Is there a rubric? Do you record them? Does it help to give them specific sets of assignments? Should you even try to enforce at-home practice at all? Isn't it kind of futile in the long run? And if you do, how do you link it to what's happening in your classroom? And most of all, how do we do any of this when we have so little time with our students to begin with? There's so many questions, but to help me answer them, and maybe even some additional ones you have considered, I've brought on my friend Giovanna, or as the world knows her, Dr. Giovanna Cruz. Giovanna is the current Education Services Manager at MakeMusic, where she works designing, building, implementing, and delivering online and in-person training to numerous school districts around the country. She's kind of the voice of the music teachers at MakeMusic. But before she started there, Giovanna accumulated over 10 years of experience as an orchestral and chamber musician, college and private studio teacher, and public school teacher, including 7 years when she taught orchestra in Austin, Texas. She, of course, has bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in this episode as well. She is originally from Venezuela, but has lived here in the United States and is wonderful. You're really going to love this episode. So let's jump in.
Thank you, Elisa. So my name is Giovanna Cruz, and I am a cellist and a former music educator. I was born and raised in Caracas, Venezuela, and I learned to play cello when I was 6 in a school called the Colegio Emil Friedman, which was founded by a man that came from the Czech Republic after the Second World War. He was a violinist and an educator and a philosopher and a lawyer. He was like this Renaissance man that could do a bunch of different things. And he fell in love with this woman in Venezuela who was an educator and decided to stay after the war. And they founded this school with his name. And the motto of the school was, "There's no culture without musical culture." And so all of the kids that went there, it was a K through 12 school, were surrounded by music all the time and by sports and by the arts. And he believed in the sciences for educating the mind and the arts for educating the heart. So that was my background. I started to play cello when I was 6. This was really a part of my life. And there was this whole paradigm about the conservatory that was in the school. So I learned to play the instrument before I joined any ensemble. And in my mind, that's how it works, right? So fast forward, 30 years probably, and I come to the United States to do some graduate studies in performance. And then after I finished that, I moved to Texas and I start teaching orchestra in public school. And so my paradigm was, I'm going to get to this classroom where everybody already knows how to play their instrument and we're going to have a rehearsal. Because, well, that was my experience. And little did I know that it is nothing like that in here. So
did you have the typical experience where you had some kids who had private lessons for a long time and then some who had just picked it up that week?
Yes. So yes, absolutely. There were a few students who had been taking lessons for a little while. And when I say a little while, I had 9th graders and maybe some of them had started in 6th grade, which I found out just then and there that that's when they start their string playing here. And, 6th grade versus 1st grade, there's a lot of years in the middle to gain a lot of skill. So that was another reality check for me. So a few of them had been taking lessons for a little while, but the majority were not taking lessons. So I very quickly realized that the rehearsal was not the place where we were going to just rehearse and put all the parts together. The rehearsal was the place where I was going to do all my teaching. And then we were also going to try and put the piece together as part of the rehearsal. So after a year or so in, I realized, how am I going to do this? How am I going to be able to hear every single student and know how they're playing and what they're doing, and be able to extend myself and teach all of them individually during an 8-hour day or a 24-hour day? Because, you still want to be able to go home and have a life and not spend 16 hours a day at school. So I needed to find some solution that would allow me to listen to all my students. At TMEA, I think it was in 2010, I just came across Smart Music, and that kind of did it for me. 5 years later, I'm working for them, but that's not what this webinar is about. I mean, that's not what this podcast is about.
That's okay. No, but tell us though, what is your role at Smart Music? Because obviously you and I know each other and have worked together peripherally. And my understanding is you are the voice of music educators within the Smart Music organization. But how do you see your role?
Yeah, and that's exactly it. I came in as the voice of the music educator, so I was the customer using the product in the way that they wanted people to use the product. And this opportunity came up to join the company, and I did. And initially, my role was basically helping other educators learn how to use the product. Having been an educator myself, a power user of the program and a champion for Smart Music, it was evangelizing basically customers so that they could get the same benefit from it. And so I would do clinics, and I would do trainings, and I would do that kind of thing, and then bring all the feedback from educators to the company. Then that role evolved, and I'm now the manager of customer success, where I continue to be that voice of the educator. And I want to make sure that I engage our users so that they continue using the product and deriving the most value out of it, so that it helps them do the things that they want to do.
But it all goes back to the main topic that we're talking about, which is at-home practice, right? Because
absolutely,
and this is something, because my background is in band and orchestra and choral directing and stuff like that. But for even longer, I have been a private lesson teacher. And I have found that if you just tell the kids, like, go home and practice, right? They're not actually going to do anything. It's not going to be deliberate. They're going to get home, they'll pull their instrument out, they'll set their timer, and they'll noodle around for some time just to, call it good. But it's the intentional practice and the deliberate practice that makes a difference. So as a private teacher, I always made sure that I had like a checklist. Here are the things that you will practice this week. Here are the parts that I want to hear specifically when you come back next week. So what's your experience with at-home practice? How did you take your group of kids who you wanted to rehearse but couldn't and get them to do the work at home?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, most of what I'm going to say today are things that, first of all, are not my original ideas. Like all teachers, we kind of steal from other people, and many things that I have thought retrospectively. So many I did while I was teaching in the classroom, but then being removed from it and thinking about how things went, I have all of these ideas about how, if I had the opportunity to do it again, I might do it differently, or I might do it the same. So definitely deliberate practice is a very important thing. There's a book out there by Anders Ericsson about it, and it has 4 components. It's setting goals, receiving expert instruction, then practicing the skills that your instructor is teaching you, and then finally receiving feedback. And that's a constant loop, and that feedback is what helps you get better and better and better. So my background is both in education and performance, but not music education as the degree. So I have a degree in early childhood education, and then I have a master's and a DMA in performance. My background is in performance, so many of these things about deliberate practice I knew how to apply to myself when I was going through my studies in graduate school. I think as performing musicians, we know what a deliberate practice session looks like. You select X number of measures, and you know that you have to slow them down, and you know that you're going to repeat them X number of times, and you know that you're going to gradually speed them up, and then you know that you're going to extend that chunk to the adjacent measures to put things back in context and whatnot. And so those are things that I would naturally try to do with my students in the classroom. But looking back, I am not entirely convinced that when they went home, they actually did them on their own. Not because I didn't teach them how to do it, but because in addition to teaching them how to do them, I perhaps didn't verbalize it in a way where they could connect the theory with the practice, if that makes sense. So I think that's the main thing when you're trying to motivate your students to practice and to do at home the same things that you've been working on in the classroom. Because like I said, since in my particular case, or in everybody's case, the rehearsal is not necessarily the place where you're actually rehearsing, but you're teaching a lot of what you're hoping your students to do. They're going to have to go home and put in that time. But if they can't make the connections between the concepts and the practice that you're teaching in the classroom and what they then have to go home and do, then all they're going to do is get that instrument out of the case and look at the clock and look through Instagram for a few minutes and call it a practice session.
Yeah, I've tried to instill this in my students. My predecessor, like most, I don't want to say most, like many music teachers, used a practice chart where they would have to track their practice and have their parents sign it and then bring it back. And, my dad, who was my mentor for a long time, taught me that if kids are going to lie to you, they may as well lie to your face. So he advocated for, instead of written practice charts, just asking kids how much they were practicing. But with my background in private lessons, I can tell who's been practicing. I'm sure most of us can. You could tell without practice charts, right?
Absolutely. And I live with a private teacher. My husband is a horn player like you, and he has a large private studio. But yes, I could totally tell in the classroom with 40 kids. I may not be able to tell in that moment, the kid sitting 10th chair didn't practice last night, but you hear them and you know whether they practiced or they didn't practice.
Do they know that you know?
I would tell them that I knew whether or not they had practice. But we're talking a few years ago, so I don't remember all the specifics anyway. But
you were like, I could totally tell you're like way behind.
No, but that's why Smart Music was so game-changing for me, because how else was I going to know how the 10th chair was playing if I couldn't hear them individually in class every day? Because, the reality is you only have 50 minutes or 90 minutes once we switch to block schedule to get X amount of work done. And you can't go and single out every single student and have them play. Plus, they feel singled out. And then there's that whole other dynamic happening in the classroom, right? So the only way, aside from having teachers teach them private lessons, which again has a whole host of other issues, like can they afford it? Can you have the lesson program in school, et cetera, et cetera? The only other way that I could hear every single one of them was through Smart Music. So once I discovered that, I just started sending them assignments of the things that I specifically wanted them to practice at the tempo I wanted them to practice it. And then they had to submit it to me. And then I could hear those recordings, and those would inform my next rehearsal. So one of the things that I found inspirational was I was preparing for a clinic on this topic one day, and I was listening to Dr. Jack Stamp. And there was a phrase he said that really resonated with me, and it was, the key to great performances is successful rehearsals. The process to get there is preparation, implementation, and evaluation. And then he went on to say that we do the preparation once at the very beginning when we choose our repertoire and we study our score and we know the sections that we're going to practice or teach or rehearse, and then that's it. But it turns out that this preparation, implementation, and evaluation is a cyclical process because you have to continuously do it in order to get better. So to me, evaluating was listening to those recordings from the students and adjusting my plan according to what it was that I heard so that we could tackle those sections and make it better. So then in addition to that, you also have to motivate the students to practice and teach them how, specifically teach them how. Yes, by modeling, but also verbalizing it. And that's the part where I think I modeled it, but maybe I didn't verbalize it so well for them. So I wasn't entirely convinced that they were applying it. I mean, we did well at concerts and at contests and things like that. So I have the hope that I did in fact teach them how to practice. But I also know, because I would see the kids in the classroom, they would like whip out their violin and then start playing a tempo and then getting tied up in the same spot over and over again. I'm like, no, slow down.
But like most teachers, you probably had many different ways to teach it, because some kids are going to learn by you modeling it, and some are going to learn by you telling them how to do it, and some are going to learn by writing it down, and some are going to learn by seeing it. So I'm sure you had many different ways to teach them how to practice.
Yeah. So I would many times just grab my instrument and play for them. And that way I was modeling what I wanted them to do. I would also maybe put smart music on the screen or play a recording of the piece that we were working on. I think the modeling part was really important, but there's a number of modeling techniques that you can use. And there is a practice coach out there called Greg Goodhart, Greg with 2 G's. And, things such as slowing down and chunking and repetition and dotted rhythm. So the dotted rhythm thing is something that I specifically remember from my years in graduate school. If you have, say, a passage of 16th notes, that is getting your fingers twisted. Instead of going 1 iana, 2 iana, taka, 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 you go da, 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 and change those rhythms to try to trick your brain. And then after you did that a few times, then you could go back and play through the passage and it was better. You could change bowings on things. So if you normally, and I say bowing because I'm a string player, if something starts down bow, then you could start it up bow and feel all awkward about it. Or if it starts up bow, start it down bow. Or if it's, if it's separate bows, then slur it. And if it's slur, then separate the bows or separate the two hands. Just work on the bowing hand.
Or play it backwards. You ever play it backwards?
Oh no, I don't think I have played it backwards, but if you go to ggoodhart.com, there is a little video that he has in there somewhere where he's having a student play things backwards. And yeah, that just blows my mind.
And that link will be in our show notes.
But yeah, it's just many different ways to trick your brain and create neural pathways to get things going so that when you go back to the original version of what you're trying to do, it just becomes so much easier. So I did do some of those things in the classroom, definitely did chunking, definitely did repetition, definitely did the slowing down and gradually increasing the speed back up. If I were to go back, I would do more of the dotted rhythms. I would do more of the adding a note at a time. I would challenge the students to play it backwards. And that would be a whole lot more fun too for them, I think, because we could make it a competition to see who can play the most notes backwards faster or whatever. So
that's a great idea.
Yeah. I'm sure that they would get a kick out of that.
We always do. I make all my kids stand up, and then I say, if you make a mistake, you sit down. Mm-hmm. And then we get faster and faster and faster. And so it's like the last person standing. But there's hundreds of those great rehearsal ideas.
Yeah. Beyond that, there's some things about the psychology of practice and mindset that are not my original ideas by any means. And I actually learned about these psychologists through Bob Phillips, who's a well-known strings pedagogue. We did a webinar a while ago where he taught me about these psychologists. So I will always be grateful to him for letting me know about them. But these ideas are great. The idea of mindset, that expertise is created and not innate. As teachers, I think we have the responsibility to instill that concept in our students or help them understand that whatever they can do is not set from above, that they have the ability to grow into the person they want to be. They have the ability to grow into the musician they want to be and grow their skills if their mind is set in a growth mindset, instead of thinking, oh, my I am good at this because I was born with skill, versus no, the more I practice this, the better I'm going to get. So that idea of mindset, that expertise is created and not innate, is an idea by Carol Dweck.
I was about to say, that's Carol Dweck.
Yeah.
And Bob Phillips, he co-wrote the String Explorer books, right?
I think so. You may have to cut that part. I think so.
I'm like 100% sure he co-wrote the String Explorer books.
Okay. Then there's also this idea of willpower, which I think is so important in this day and age, where our attention is called in so many different directions, and where the existence of social media and immediate gratification makes us not want to focus for a period of time. The idea that you can choose the should versus the want. Okay, have the willpower to do the things that you should be doing, and postpone the things you want to do for pleasure until a bit later, because once you do the things that you should do, you're going to feel good and you're going to get pleasure from that as well. Another idea for motivating students comes from this psychologist called Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and I'm not sure that I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but he's a psychologist in Chicago, and is the idea of getting the kids to experience flow. It's the theory of flow. And flow is that state of mind where basically time disappears. All of us have probably experienced, getting so immersed in reading a book, for example, that next time we look at the clock, it's been 3 hours and we don't know where time went. Or in music, we are practicing and we're having so much fun with what we're doing that we look at the clock again and, it's nighttime and we started and it was 3 p.m. Or I have a very personal example. I was doing my master's recital and I don't remember how it went. I know that I had this feeling that it went great, but I don't remember the specifics of it, because it was like as if I was watching myself from above play. And then I listened to the recording. I was like, oh, that was amazing. And where did time go? And
I love that. Yeah, that's awesome.
I was like floating up there. Well, that's flow, And so the idea to get kids to experience flow is to program music that is just a little bit harder than where they are, but not that hard that they can't do it on their own. So they have enough skill to play it, but it's a bit of a challenge. And so then it becomes enjoyable. And the more we can get them to experience that, the more hooked they get into being in band or being in orchestra or being in choir or doing whatever activity we want them to do. And then obviously the deliberate practice that we already have talked about.
So just to kind of recap, we want our kids to practice at home so that they can rehearse at school, because we can do some practice at school, but ideally we want to spend our school rehearsal time working on literature and, touching base with certain skills and stuff like that. And so to do so, we need to basically teach them how to practice, how to have deliberate practice, how to, and then have ways to teach them how to practice differently.
Definitely, yes.
What else am I missing? And then we talked about growth mindset.
Yep. And then creating a culture of practice that is both inside the classroom and outside the classroom.
There you go. That's the important one.
Yes. So talk to the students about these concepts of having a growth mindset, of having willpower. You don't necessarily have to talk to them about flow, but help them experience flow with the music that you program for them. So it's this idea of, play through so that they can get in that flow of the music. Nitpick it because it's important, but don't spend your entire rehearsal nitpicking. And that's something that I would do differently if I went back to teaching, because sometimes I would spend too much time on the little detail rather than um, rather than playing through and letting the students experience the joy of making music. And then set goals. So maybe the goal for today's rehearsal is to get through without stopping because we fell apart. So let's try to stay together beginning to end. And you'll hear things that are out of tune, and maybe you'll hear wrong rhythms, and maybe they won't do the dynamics as well as you would want them to play them, but they're getting through, and that's the goal for the day. Then another day, the goal is we really need to clean up this particular passage. So we're going to spend the whole day nitpicking today, and that's the goal. And have different goals for different days and state them clearly for the students so that they know what the expectation is for the day. And I just can't say it enough, but just model the behavior you want to see in your students.
See, how is modeling different from teaching them by rote? I was kind of indoctrinated that teaching by rote is kind of the wrong way to go. That we want them to be literate, right? And if they're literate, that means they can read the music. And if we are teaching them by rote and they're picking it up by ear, are they actually learning it?
Well, I mean, I would kick the question back to you, because you said you're a private teacher. When you model on your instrument, are you teaching them by rote, or are you just, demonstrating the sound, demonstrating the fingering, showing, where the hand goes in the bell, or this fingering works better than the other fingering? So modeling with your instrument doesn't necessarily mean, okay, I'm going to imitate exactly what I'm doing. So you learn everything by ear. Is showing a model of what you want them to do, whether that is the sound that you want them to make, being able to hear what a specific rhythm that they're having trouble with sounds like, showing them a tricky fingering, because that's a better way to get, from one string to the other, or what the arm movement needs to be when you make a string crossing from the C string to the A string, or whatever. I'm not entirely convinced that that's the same as teaching by rote.
I just remember when I grew my orchestra program very quickly to the point where by the third year, the second year I had 60 kids in beginning orchestra all by myself, which was amazing. And they sounded great, of course. But by the next year, the band had grown too, and we hired a part-time orchestra person to take over. And she would just stand in front of the classroom and play along with the students. And I just kind of watched from afar and was like, is that really teaching? But I digress. You totally are making an amazing point about modeling. And if you think about the other subjects, right? Great authors read great books, and amazing artists look at other people's art. So it shouldn't be a problem for us to teach by rote, or help them learn by ear, or model for them exactly how it should happen.
Yeah. Plus, teaching some things by ear doesn't mean you're not teaching how to read music, or you're not teaching how to count. So I think that if you're doing all of the things, then you're covering all of your bases, and it's not just teaching by rote.
I do have a question for you.
Yes.
And it has to do with smart music. So forgive me, listeners, if we're touching on more smart music, but one of my things is, how did you listen to all of your students before every next rehearsal?
Well, so I don't think I didn't necessarily send an assignment that was due before each and every rehearsal, because that would be unrealistic to think that I'm going to have 3 orchestras with 40 kids each, and that we meet every other day, and then I'm going to be able to listen to 120 students every single day. That's just, there aren't enough hours in the day. So, but I would send maybe an assignment a week, and then I would go in and listen. It was a bit of a trade-off, because that meant that I had to listen to things after school or at home at night, but it ensured that I was hearing everyone, and then I could, if I was using that assignment for a grade, then I could grade them more fairly than if I didn't listen. So no, I didn't listen to them after or before every single rehearsal, but I did listen to them periodically.
And did they do their assignments during your class time, or was it all homework?
It was homework. Yeah. And then at a certain time, I decided I was not going to do chair tests anymore in class because they would take the entire class period. And I just couldn't afford not to have that time to teach them or to rehearse together. So then I moved the chair tests to outside of class as well and do them via Smart Music. And some of them loved that. And some of the others really did not love it because Smart Music made them accountable. And they were very grade conscious, so they didn't want to submit something that wasn't up to their standard. So in the end, it ended up working to my advantage as well because they were practicing more so they could submit their best take for their chair test.
That's so awesome. So being an orchestra expert, I'm going to call you, for people like me who are more into band, and maybe we get a job where we have to be teaching band and orchestra and maybe even choir or, some combination thereof. Do you think, what are the top tips you would give to somebody who maybe isn't a string player but just got a job teaching orchestra?
Oh, wow. Well, I think...
sorry, I'm like totally hitting you with this question. We didn't even talk about it.
I think, first of all, the Smart Music blog has an ebook for that. But in addition to reading about it, I'm sure that you have friends and colleagues that are string players. So get together with them, get a few lessons so that you can learn some of the basics of instrument placement and what the left hand does and what the right hand does, and basic fingerings and motions, so that when you go to meet all your string students, you have an idea of what it is that you're asking them to do. I think that's very important. Get some lessons. Go to concerts, watch performances, get together with your colleagues and talk about it.
Awesome. So any other tips you want to give us for helping our students create intentional and deliberate practice at home?
I think that the main takeaways are, drum roll, please.
Oh, sorry. There you go.
I think, to tie it all together, make sure that you plan, you implement, and you evaluate your rehearsals. And whether that's with Smart Music or not, whether you're recording your rehearsals, making notes in a notebook, whatever it is that you're doing. My son is in second grade, and I went in for a parent-teacher conference, and she had a notebook where she had pages for every student. So she's taking notes constantly and knows exactly what each student is doing. We should be doing the same thing in some way, shape, or form, whether it is a notebook that we have or an individual recording that we're making using Smart Music, filming our students, whatever it is that we're doing, we need to be able to evaluate it, right? So plan, implement, and evaluate your rehearsals, then rinse and repeat. Model the behavior you want to see in your students. Demonstrate how to practice while you're in class. So don't be afraid to grab your instrument and show the technique that you're talking about. If it is, let's add dotted rhythms to this so that we figure out this 16th note passage. Don't just talk about it, demonstrate it so the students have both a verbal explanation of it and they have seen you do it, and then have them imitate you so that they understand it, and then have them do it on their own. And if you can't play the instrument that you're trying to demonstrate a concept on, then ask one of your best students to demonstrate it for you. If you do use Smart Music, then use it both as a visual and oral aid in class every day, so they get used to seeing what the tool looks like, so that if you decide to send them assignments in the tool, that they're familiar already. Build a culture of practice inside and out of the classroom. One of the things that I didn't say was that you could have, achievement charts for who practices the most. You could do practice-a-thons. You could do fundraising with practice. Figure out a way to hold some kind of contest where the more students practice and the more money they'll get their friends and neighbors to donate or something. And then set expectations for your students regarding the amount of practice. And tell them that you're going to know if they practiced or not, because you have good ears and you can tell. And then if you do have recordings, listen to them. Take the time to listen, because the students took the time to make them and provide them with that feedback that they will need to get better. That's what I would say.
Those are amazing tips. And I just want to add, one of my own, to really celebrate when you do find them practicing. And when they do start to hear the growth. My bands were finally able to play beginning to end on both of their contest songs. And we have contest in just a few days. And it was amazing. And I stopped. They were so proud of themselves. They all started cheering at the end of the song. And I said, guys, this happened because you're practicing at home.
Yeah.
Are they all practicing at home? No. But most of them are now.
Yeah.
And by acknowledging that and rewarding it, even just with that little, verbal pat on the back, it made a huge difference.
You know what's great too, and something that we used to do at the end of the school year, I would play the recording. We would record all of the concerts. So, at the end of May, before the school year ended, we'd get together in class. We're done with our spring concert, and we're just trying to wrap up the school year or whatever. Then I would play back all of the recordings from all the concerts. But the most contrasting thing would be to play the recording from the first concert and then play the recording from their last concert. And the growth was just exponential, and they could tell. So, reinforcing that idea of practice. You got as good as this because we've been practicing the entire school year, whether you actually did practice at home or only played in class every day. You have been at this skill for a period of time, and look how much better you've gotten. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. And this has been just so motivating. I'm so excited to implement some of these things in our own classrooms to get our kids to practice.
Yes, awesome. It's been great talking with you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
I know that for many of our listeners, you might be in the middle of the long summer break. But I hope that this conversation has helped give you ideas for what you may like to implement or maybe let go in your program to be more streamlined and at the same time be more engaging when it comes to practice. I know one of my great struggles as a music teacher has been to identify specific areas for improvement for individual students, and this episode gave me some hope. For those of you on a bit of a break from teaching, why not give Smart Music a try for your own practice? Pull out your horn, your viola, your voice, whatever you're great at, or maybe what you need practice on, and give Smart Music a try. It's totally free for you to give it a go, and I'm willing to bet you're going to have fun. Big thanks to Smart Music for making this episode happen, not just because Giovanna is an outstanding conversationalist and presenter, but because they genuinely care about providing the best and most helpful information for music educators. If you, too, want to help share content that music teacher colleagues will love, I do hope you'll take a moment and share this podcast episode. Like, rate, and subscribe yourself, too. You have my undying thanks for listening, for being here, for being an amazing music teacher. And now it's time for you to get the gratitude of all those music teachers, too, who are just barely finding us and discovering the episodes that are helping them be better music educators, too. And now, my friends, keep teaching on.